Friday, 3rd May, 2023. 10:15 a.m. A quiet morning in Blackburn, Lancashire. At an old warehouse known as the Old Fire Station, officers wait outside a shuttered door. Behind it, pallets of storage items, sealed and stacked for distribution. Nothing unusual until that door lifts. But this story doesn't begin or end there. 3 years earlier, in the spring of 2020, Manchester detectives were decoding messages from an encrypted platform. At the same time, further south in Kent, another set of encrypted users were moving kilos of cocaine under names like Call Me Curly and Call Me Fisherman. Different regions, different years, with the same commodity. Each group thought they'd found the perfect disguise, but one by one, each operation was exposed. This is the story of how a cold warehouse in Lancashire, a network of encrypted phones in Manchester, and Kent became the focus of an unbroken police pursuit. One that tracked every courier, every message, and every hidden kilo until the networks finally fell. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the case. The man at the centre of the Lancashire case was 46-year-old Saleem Chaudhry, a long-time Blackburn resident living at Waterside. Outwardly, his life appeared stable, a man with access to storage units and business links that didn't attract attention. But for almost a year, what looked like legitimate trade through a cold storage network was being used to move tons of Class A cocaine across the country. His base of operations was the Old Fire Station, a disused commercial building converted into a private warehouse. It sat among other storage units on a quiet industrial road, the kind of place where early morning deliveries came and went unnoticed. From here, Chaudhry managed a distribution system that functioned with the precision of a logistics firm, shipments arriving from the continent, repackaged and sent on through couriers to different parts of the UK. Detectives later established that between September 2022 and May 2023, he had agreed to supply over 2,000 kilograms of cocaine, an extraordinary scale of trade with an estimated wholesale value of £70 million, positioning him among the upper tiers of supply. What made Chaudhry's operation so effective was its simplicity disguised as legitimacy. The drugs had been moved under cover of a regular import route from Belgium, concealed inside blocks of Gouda cheese. Cold chain shipping kept the temperature consistent and disguised the smell. Even trained sniffer dogs would have struggled to distinguish between dairy produce and narcotics sealed deep inside. Each block was roughly 2 feet long, cut and resealed to look untouched. Others were stored in black bin bags, ready for dispatch to couriers already on standby. From the outside, it looked like a thriving import operation. But within those refrigerated crates lay the evidence of a network running on industrial scale, and the first clues that would soon lead detectives from Lancashire to a much wider trail. At the opposite end of the country, nearly 150 miles from Blackburn, another figure played a crucial role in keeping the network running. Riyadul Mohabbath, just 28 years old, operated quietly from his home on Dean Road in South Shields. To those who knew him, he seemed like any other local resident. But to investigators piecing the operation together, he was far more than a courier. He was the coordinator, the link between Chaudhry's Lancashire warehouse and the distribution lines stretching across the northeast. Encrypted phone data later showed Mohabbath directing couriers in real time, instructing them when to leave Blackburn, which routes to take, and where to drop deliveries. He rarely handled the drugs himself, but he was involved in almost every movement of product and cash. His voice, captured through messages and call logs, formed a digital map of the organisation, one that mirrored the physical route cocaine took from Lancashire's industrial parks to the Tyne coast. The investigation that ultimately brought down Chaudhry's network began with a single piece of intelligence. Early in 2023, Lancashire police received information suggesting that large quantities of Class A drugs were being imported from continental Europe into the northwest under the cover of legitimate goods. It wasn't the first time officers had heard such reports, but something about this one, the consistency of the shipments, the unremarkable nature of the consignments, stood out. Detectives within the East Targeted Crime Team and the Serious Organised Crime Unit launched a covert operation. Their focus quickly turned to the old fire station in Blackburn, a location that had begun to appear in vehicle movement data and surveillance logs. The building had no active business registration, no visible signage, and no official deliveries listed through port-import records, yet refrigerated vans came and went at regular intervals. For weeks, officers conducted stakeouts using unmarked vehicles positioned around nearby streets. Others followed suspect cars making repeated trips between Blackburn, the Midlands, and the Northeast. As the pattern emerged, so did the connection. Several couriers seen visiting the old fire station were later traced to addresses linked to South Shields, confirming the existence of a two-region operation. Behind the scenes, investigators built a detailed picture of communications. Phone analysis and call mapping showed consistent contacts between Chaudhry and Riyad al-Mohabbath, even during periods when neither appeared to be traveling. Encryption limited direct message access, but frequency and timing revealed coordination typical of high-volume drug logistics. May 3, 2023 began like any other morning on Walpole Street, Blackburn. Delivery vehicles moved quietly through the industrial estate, the low hum of refrigeration units echoing off the warehouse walls. But among them were unmarked police cars, strategically placed after weeks of surveillance. The operation was ready to move. Shortly after 10 o'clock, Saleem Chaudhry arrived at the old fire station unit. He parked his car, unlocked the roller shutter, and began to lift it, unaware that armed officers were already closing in. The moment he pulled the door halfway, the team advanced. What happened next was caught entirely on body-worn camera footage later released by Lancashire police. Inside the warehouse, the scale of the operation became immediately clear. Stacked on pallets were crates of Gouda cheese, wrapped and sealed for transport. Beside them, black bin bags filled with packages of white powder, industrial rolls of cling film, and vacuum sealing machinery. Detectives knew at once they had found the core of the operation. Chaudhry was arrested on site without resistance. Nearby, one courier was detained attempting to leave the area, but a second courier escaped, heading north in a separate vehicle. Investigators quickly traced that car's route towards South Shields, confirming through communication data that the driver remained in contact with Riyad al-Mohabbath during the journey. As officers continued to secure the building, they catalogued the evidence: 217 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, each brick hidden inside blocks of imported cheese. It was Lancashire Police's largest single cocaine seizure to date, with an estimated street value of £17.2 million. The success in Blackburn triggered a series of coordinated follow-up raids. At Chaudhry's home on Waterside, police recovered around £10,000 in cash, bundled in drawers and cupboards. Documents linking him to transport vehicles and contact lists for drivers were also seized. Further north, officers from the same task force, working alongside the Northeast Regional Organised Crime Unit, targeted addresses connected to Riyad al-Mohabbath. He was arrested outside his property on Dean Road, South Shields, standing only a few feet from an Audi later found to contain snap bags of cocaine. A search of a linked property in Jarrow uncovered cash bundles, a counting machine, and suspected Class A drugs in various quantities. The evidence tied every thread together, the supply line running from Belgium through Blackburn's warehouse and finally into South Shields' distribution base. Investigators later said both men had gone to great lengths to hide their product, relying on the precision of temperature-controlled logistics to mask odor, weight, and authenticity. What they hadn't accounted for was the patience of the officers following every delivery, every coded message, and every van that rolled through the old fire station's shutter. Nearly a year after the dramatic raid in Blackburn, the case reached Preston Crown Court. Now, the overwhelming evidence was laid out in full, and the financial trail connecting two men at the heart of an industrial-scale drug conspiracy. During the hearing, Detective Sergeant Hayden Sibley from Lancashire Police's East Targeted Crime Team described the scale of the operation and recalled Chaudhry's reaction at the moment of arrest. You could see by the look on his face that his world had crumbled. His comment reflected not only the downfall of the operation, but the sudden collapse of a network that had appeared untouchable. In closing statements, prosecutors highlighted that this case represented Lancashire Constabulary's largest ever Class A drug seizure, and a benchmark for how cross-border importation could be dismantled through patient, coordinated policing. On Friday, 12th April 2024, Saleem Chaudhry, aged 46, stood before the court and pleaded guilty to conspiring to supply cocaine and money laundering. Judge and jury heard how Chaudhry's operation was structured with precision. For his leadership role and the magnitude of the supply network, Chaudhry received a sentence of 27 years and 6 months in prison, one of the longest ever imposed in Lancashire for a single Class A drugs case. 3 days later, on Monday, the 15th of April 2024, Riyadul Mohabbath, aged 28, appeared before the same court. He also pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine. Mohabbath was sentenced to 16 years imprisonment. Between March and May 2020, as the country sat under lockdown, the streets of Greater Manchester looked quieter than ever. But behind the silence, an encrypted network was alive with activity, a stream of coded messages moving between dealers, couriers, and cash collectors. This was the digital heartbeat of an organised crime group operating across Manchester, Rochdale, and Oldham. At the centre of it was EncroChat, and after decoded in June 2020, it exposed thousands of criminal networks across Europe, including one in Greater Manchester. Among the usernames retrieved, 4 stood out, each one belonging to a different figure within the same encrypted conspiracy. Nathan Lobley, 38, who went by Carrot Toxic; Thomas Bradley, 33, known as Lovely Seal; Craig Ganson, 43, identified as Paperball; and Paul Taylor, 46, using the handle Augeroux Together. Their handles form the digital backbone of a criminal network that believed it could operate beyond the reach of law enforcement. Until EncroChat fell. The encrypted exchanges between these accounts revealed a coordinated operation focused on the importation and distribution of cocaine and heroin on a multi-kilo scale. The role of each individual will be discussed in a few minutes. Working from the shadows, analysts inside the Serious Organised Crime Group, SOCG, at Greater Manchester Police began the painstaking process of decoding, extracting, and mapping the conversations. Each message became a piece of the puzzle, and personal references that slowly stripped away the anonymity of the handles. By cross-referencing data across hundreds of messages, detectives began to match each alias to a real identity. What started as an indecipherable digital stream soon became a clear organizational map. One showing not just who these men were, but exactly how their network moved drugs, firearms, and cash across Manchester during one of the most tightly monitored periods in modern history. The EncroChat data laid out the structure of a business built on precision. Each man had a role, and every message on the network mapped out his responsibilities like departments in a company. Nathan Lobley, operating under the handle Carrot Toxic, was at the top of that chain. Messages traced him taking possession of at least 19 kilograms of cocaine, with a street value estimated between £684,000 and £798,000. He also arranged the transfer of a firearm and ammunition, confirming the group's willingness to arm themselves to protect shipments or enforce debts. Lobley initially denied his involvement, but the EncroChat logs were so precise that every coded exchange could be traced back to his movements, bank references, and known associates. Below him was Thomas Bradley, known online as Lovely Seal, the group's money man. His messages showed him collecting cash from around 20 other encrypted users, often on a daily basis. Between 16th March and 31st May 2020, he had moved roughly £5.8 million, averaging about £2 million per month. He kept meticulous digital records, logging pickups, transfers, and deposits. It was Bradley's volume of communication that first caught the attention of investigators. Every message he sent left a breadcrumb that would later tie him to the wider conspiracy. Craig Ganson, using paperboard, operated as the wholesale regional supplier. Between April and June 2020, he purchased at least 11 kilograms of cocaine and 2 kilograms of heroin from upstream contacts, quantities valued at over £400,000, and redistributed them across the region through trusted buyers. Paul Taylor, whose handle Augureau appeared less frequently in the data, acted as an investor and secondary dealer. Records show he bought a kilogram of cocaine for £37,000 and passed £80,390 to Bradley during the conspiracy period, helping to fund and sustain the group's operations. The messages showed open conversations about handovers, prices, and cash movements, all written with the confidence of men who believed EncroChat's encryption was absolute. When Greater Manchester Police later recovered the firearm and ammunition, it proved the network's capability to back its operation with violence if required. What emerged was the picture of a corporate-style criminal enterprise, structured, disciplined, and defined by division of labor. Suppliers, collectors, distributors, and financiers all played their part. And for months, they did so without a trace, until EncroChat fell, and the entire organization was laid bare in plain text. By early 2022, Greater Manchester Police investigators needed to translate that intelligence into arrests. On 22nd March 2022, the force launched what they called a strike day, a coordinated series of raids across Manchester, Rochdale, and Oldham. The operation, codenamed Operation Pula, targeted those believed to be part of encrypted criminal networks distributing cocaine and heroin across the northwest. When officers arrived at the homes of the main suspects, one key figure was missing. Thomas Bradley had vanished. Detectives quickly confirmed he had fled the country using false documents and contacts built through the same network that once delivered his drug payments. For months, Bradley remained off the radar, but in December 2022, his run came to an end. Border officers at Holyhead Port detained him as he returned to the UK, confirming his identity through biometric checks. It was a quiet end to 9 months on the run. Meanwhile, the evidence extracted from seized devices continued to grow. Digital forensics teams within the Serious Organised Crime Group, SOCG, tied each EncroChat handle to physical devices found during the raids. Embedded GPS data, message timestamps, and transaction logs created an unbroken link between the encrypted accounts and their real-world users. Investigators also uncovered courier chat logs, which detailed the movement of multiple kilos of cocaine and heroin throughout the pandemic. When the results of Operation Pula were presented internally, officers described it as a benchmark case, a demonstration of how encrypted networks could be cracked open and mapped from message to movement. What had begun as silent encrypted chatter between 4 men now stood as a fully exposed enterprise. On Thursday, 13th of June 2024, the 4 men at the centre of Greater Manchester's encrypted drug conspiracy stood before Minchell Street Crown Court. After years of investigation, surveillance and digital forensics, the case of Operation Pula reached its conclusion. All the overwhelming evidence left no room for doubt. After sentencing, Detective Constable David Grimshaw of the Serious Organised Crime Group addressed the results, saying the men thought encryption made them untouchable, but it didn't. He credited the investigation as a complex, multi-agency effort that dismantled not just a drug supply line, but an armed criminal in infrastructure operating across the city. Greater Manchester Police emphasised that beyond the drugs themselves, the group's activities had fueled violence, debt, and intimidation in local communities. The force renewed its public appeal, urging residents to report suspected drug activity through Crime Stoppers, the GMP live chat, or emergency channels. Nathan Lobley, aged 38, was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and supplying a firearm and ammunition. Thomas Bradley, aged 33, received 9 years for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and money laundering. Craig Ganson, aged 43, was sentenced to 7 years and 10 months for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Paul Taylor, aged 46, was jailed for 5 years and 8 months for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and money laundering. In total, the four received a combined sentence of 36 years and 6 months. A decisive outcome that marked the end of one of Manchester's most intricate EncroChat cases. With Manchester's network taken down, another encrypted trail was already emerging, this time in Kent. Between March and June 2020, while the country faced the peak of the first lockdown, another encrypted supply chain was quietly moving tons of high-purity cocaine, this time from the coastal routes of Kent through to southeast London and Norfolk. What began as a stream of coded messages on EncroChat soon revealed a regional network operating with the same confidence seen in Manchester's case, but built on smaller, faster movements designed to avoid detection. At the centre was Bradley O'Neill, aged 29, of Halfway Road, Sheerness. Using the handle Call Me Curly, O'Neill coordinated deliveries and payments to his, whereas his closest associate was Wayne Denton, aged 37, of Palmer Way, Downham Market, who operated under the handle Call Me Fisherman. The investigation also linked a third figure, Charlie Etherton, aged 25, of Witherston Way, Eltham, southeast London. We will talk about each of them in detail in a few minutes. All three men also believed, like many others, that EncroChat's encrypted messages were untouchable, that their words would disappear without trace. But once cracked, every coded transaction, every postcode, and every password became evidence, spelling out in plain detail the story of how a regional supply chain in Kent had thrived under the illusion of digital secrecy. Bradley O'Neill, the ringleader, was the first to give himself away. In a series of messages, he referenced previous encounters with police, including an incident in April 2020 on the A2 near Bexley Heath, when he was stopped and searched by officers. At the time, he even mentioned getting nicked and referred to a helicopter overhead, details that investigators later matched to official Metropolitan Police records of a stop assisted by the National Police Air Service. The cross-referenced information confirmed beyond doubt that the user behind the handle was indeed O'Neill. He went further, mentioning the names and birthdays of family members in his encrypted chats, unknowingly giving detectives personal identifiers that tied directly back to him. Those slips, small and seemingly harmless at the time, became key evidence when investigators later matched metadata to his phone and home address. His associate, Wayne Denton, made an even more direct error. He once sent a photo of his driving license to O'Neill during an exchange, an image that instantly revealed his full name, date of birth, and address in Downham Market, Norfolk. Investigators would later describe the act as the single most incriminating message in the thread, effectively removing any anonymity he thought he had. But the unraveling of the Kent operation wasn't limited to encrypted messages or digital clues only. In March 2021, nearly a year after the EncroChat network had already been compromised, police surveillance led them to one of the most dramatic sequences of the case, a high-speed pursuit through the suburban streets of Sidcup, southeast London. At the centre of it was Charlie Etherton, a 25-year-old from Witherston Way, Eltham, who had been working alongside O'Neill and Denton as part of a linked supply chain spanning from Kent to London and as far north as Lancashire. Etherton was under active surveillance as detectives pieced together movements between addresses in Eltham, Greenwich and Chislehurst, all known hubs for distribution. On the 3rd of March 2021, police units moved in to intercept a rental Toyota Prius fitted with false plates. Behind the wheel was Etherton, but rather than stopping, he accelerated sharply, initiating a pursuit that stretched across several miles of residential roads. According to court records, the chase quickly escalated. Etherton reached 77 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour zone, forcing other drivers to take evasive action. He mounted a pavement, narrowly avoiding pedestrians, and drove on the wrong side of the road to escape pursuing officers. At one junction, he ran a red light at full speed, a move prosecutors later described as an act of utter disregard for public safety. The pursuit came to an abrupt end when Atherton abandoned the vehicle and fled on foot, cutting through back gardens and scaling fences. In the chaos, he dropped a Sainsbury's shopping bag, which officers later recovered during a ground search. Inside, forensic teams discovered 1 kilogram of cocaine, tested at 93% purity, consistent with high-grade imports from European suppliers. While Atherton initially evaded capture, the bag and the vehicle told the story he tried to run from. Fingerprints, contact traces, and surveillance footage linked him directly to the car and to the wider EncroChat network. 13 days later, he was arrested without incident, having already contacted police through his solicitor, asking, almost casually, if he could hand himself in after celebrating his birthday on March 19th. The pursuit marked the final break in the Kent supply chain. It exposed not just a courier in panic, but the desperation of a crumbling organization already under the weight of digital evidence. What began as a reckless attempt to escape became one of the clearest pieces of physical proof tying Atherton to O'Neill and Denton, and to a £2.5 million conspiracy that spanned counties. By the end of 2021, the final stage of the Kent investigation was ready to unfold. In December 2021, detectives moved on Bradley O'Neill. He was arrested at a caravan in Sheerness, where he lived with his partner and their newborn daughter. At the time of his arrest, O'Neill had already left the drug trade and was working legitimately, but the weight of evidence gathered from 2020 left no room for defense. That same day, Wayne Denton, aged 37, was also taken into custody at his home in Downham Market, Norfolk. His case was later connected to a second cocaine conspiracy stretching back to early 2021, in which he had continued to supply Class A drugs across London and the South East. I will cover that case in a separate video. The case reached its conclusion at Maidstone Crown Court on the 11th of July 2024. In his ruling, Judge Gareth Branston described their actions as operational and managerial, noting that each had played a deliberate and significant role in a well-organized criminal enterprise. Following sentencing, Detective Constable Steve Brown of Kent Police addressed the outcome. They thought encrypted messages would keep them safe, but there's no hiding place. Bradley O'Neill was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Wayne Denton received 4 years and 9 months for 2 counts of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Charlie Atherton was jailed for 5 years and 5 months and given a 3-year driving ban for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and dangerous driving, with a combined total of over 19 years in prison. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK Crime Documentaries.